Well, good morning, KOTA Territory. Welcome to KOTA's Political Polls. Today we are joined once again by investigative reporter Blake Troli. And do you mind introducing yourself real quick for our viewers who might not know who you are?
Yes, State Senator Amber Hulse.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us here this morning. Really quickly, we're talking about some situations going on down in the district that you represent, District 30, correct?
Yes.
So really quickly, Blake, kick us off with some of the questions you have.
Well, it's funny because actually, so yesterday I'd called you about something else that's going on in District 30, and we started talking about this property tax study that was recently, the group to conduct the study was recently put together. Later that day, we actually got an email from somebody about property taxes, and I thought, you know, we haven't talked about this in a second. And so the summer study group was put together, and Senator Hulse, I know you were actually not put on that list. How do you feel about that not being put on there?
Well, Governor Larry Roden is very clear that he believes that there's only 5 to 6 counties that property taxes are really an issue in. And while maybe we would disagree on that topic necessarily, I think that there's an issue of how we calculate property taxes statewide. There are just a few counties that are really seeing an impact, and I represent 3 of them. There's only, I believe, 3 people from the western side of the state on the commission, and so while that's disappointing, I hope that the people that are from West River are able to adequately represent my constituents as they try to find a solution. I really hope that this legislative session we don't see 20-something property tax bills. We all really do need to come together and come up with a solution that works for everyone, whether you're in Sioux Falls or Rapid City.
Touching on Governor Larry Roden, he had proposed the idea that counties would come up with their own individual local sales tax that would offset some of these property taxes. Have you spoken with county reps in your districts, and what has so far been the receiving of that idea?
Well, I would say that it's unfortunate that actually many of the property tax solutions that are being proposed right now are actually an increase in taxes, maybe a shift onto a different type of tax that South Dakota residents maybe aren't not bearing the full share of. But I would really like to focus also on, you know, not only how we shift, but the spending side of things. There's not been a lot of proposals looking at, are we spending money in the right places? And especially when it comes to the school funding formula, is that actually, you know, operating appropriately? Should Custer County and Hill City schools not get a penny, $0 of state revenue to fund their schools? And so all of our revenue for our schools has to be raised by property taxes, whereas like Hill City and Custer are probably raising a lot of the share of sales tax and not getting any of it. That said, I will say there actually has been some buy-in from county commissioners wanting to offset at least some of that in my areas. I think actually some of them see it as too restrictive, that if they're going to be given the power to institute a county tax, that they would like to be able to figure out what works for their area. Don't just make it 5 cents. You know, if Custer wants to raise it and basically eliminate property taxes because of how much tourism they have, then let them do that. You know, why is it the state having to, you know, kind of preempt that power and only give them a very short amount of reins? And so that's at least been when I'm talking to my local elected officials, their sentiments about it. But like I said, I think it's a broader problem, not just how do we shift it onto a different type of tax.
Do you think there's going to be any appetite within the legislature? Again, this is the governor's idea. Now it's up to the lawmakers to actually cook this up. Do you think there's going to be any appetite to kind of shift things around and maybe give them that flexibility on the percentage to go up past a ½ cent sales tax?
I mean, it's really interesting because there's obviously a spectrum of Republicans in South Dakota, so there's kind of different factions, and people from 2 very different factions are all proposing a similar type of solution, whether it's a receipt tax or an increase in sales tax or a county tax. Everyone's kind of talking about the same thing, but just with a different tweak. And so I hope that since everyone's starting to get on the same page, or at least it seems like people are starting to focus on that type of solution, that maybe we can come together on something. But it really will be the devil in the details for sure if everyone can get behind one solution that adequately, I guess, represents what their proposal is.
What do you hope to see from this study, though? What do you hope they come up with at the end of the day? I mean, best case scenario, the study's over and this is what they found.
Well, like I said, I think that the importance here is that while there is a solution in shifting the burden of property taxes to a sales tax that South Dakotans don't bear the entire burden of, we really do need to look at how your share of the pie is calculated. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. If you shift onto sales tax, that's great because you're not raising it in property taxes, so automatically your property taxes will go down by a reduction of whatever we're able to raise in sales tax. But at the end of the day, if whatever that piece of paper that comes in the mail, how they calculated that number of what your share of the pie is not being done in an efficient or effective way, or an unfair way even, then we still have a problem. And so I really hope that this summer study spends time actually looking at the formula, the school funding formula, how the levies are calculated, and the whole picture of the process, because this is now, I think, the third or fourth year in a row that they've had a summer study on this, and it seems like there hasn't been a lot to come out of the summer study. So I hope that this one really does focus on fixing the actual problem and not just providing a Band-Aid to a bullet hole.
You had a bill, Senate Bill 191, that was warning track power, as they say in baseball. It got to the warning track, wasn't quite a home run. I remember sitting in that committee hearing. This was the night before, I believe. Was it killed in committee? I can't remember.
No, it made it to the floor.
That's right. It made it through committee, and then yes, this would be the night before it died on the floor. And you got a lot of pushback from a lot of different groups who were concerned that by alleviating these property taxes on homeowners, it would shift onto ag, it would shift onto retail. What did you learn through that process, and what, I guess, advice would you give to lawmakers looking to craft a bill on this again?
Well, I mean, the homeowner does not have a lobbyist in Pierre. They have their legislator. And I think that's important to realize when you're talking about this process, because all of the other interest groups, even county officials themselves, have a lobbyist in Pierre, but the homeowner doesn't, and your legislator is supposed to be that lobbyist for you. And so when legislators are looking at this next year, I hope that they remember that no matter how many lobbyists get up and maybe are against a certain solution, if it's right for the people at the end of the day, then that's what is good and right, and that's what you were sent there to do. I also learned through the process that you shouldn't go against the governor. There's always been a saying, some of my mentors said, kiss the ring or kill the king in a way. And so I'm glad that at least something passed. And while it was the governor's bill, that was the only one that was successful out of all of the substantive property tax bills, there's still a lot more work to do here. And we can't just say, oh, well, we did something and hang up our coat and say we're done here. People are still really struggling. Young homeowners cannot afford to buy a home in the current market with the current interest rates. And so, all of this combined is about the future of South Dakota. And I just hope that lawmakers remember that this is not just about, necessarily special interest groups. This is about future generations, your kids and your grandchildren being able to buy a home in South Dakota and stay in the place that they call home.
And really quickly, you mentioned the people of South Dakota and your constituents specifically. Have you heard anything from them, at least, when it comes to this study, or the study that is to be conducted?
I mean, they're really frustrated. Like I said, I'm one of the few areas in South Dakota that I think has been most impacted, and to see not only me, but the two House members as well, neither of us, all three of us were not appointed to this commission, is very, very frustrating. And I think that they feel voiceless, they feel unheard, and they feel that the kind of big government machine is against them, and I can understand how it feels that way. There's a lot of the groups that had formed in my area that are trying to figure out if they need to, take matters into their own hands and start a ballot initiative process. And we've seen that happen in states like North Dakota, and some of those ballot initiatives could be devastating. And so these special interest groups, if you don't like some of the legislation that's, I think, kind of weak that the legislature is proposing, look at what could be proposed on the ballot and think about what that would do to some of these local budgets, and so and what shift that could cause as well. So I just hope that people take a 10,000-foot view of this entire situation and realize that maybe if it's not happening in your county, it is happening to South Dakotans in other counties, and even if it's not necessarily your constituents, your vote matters in the body. And you represent all South Dakotans in a way, not just the ones that live in your district.
I want to go forward a little bit and just talk about the election broadly. We obviously won't put you on the spot for your endorsement, but do you think it's going to be a tough election next year for lawmakers to choose who they're going to endorse, given the, so far all we have, and again, I know this Well, so far, Hansen and Lems are the only two, the Speaker of the House, John Hansen, and Representative Lems are the only two who have announced their campaign, but there is speculation that Governor Larry Roden will sign on, Congressman Dusty Johnson may sign on, and likewise with Attorney General Marty Jackley. Do you think this is going to be hard for lawmakers to choose a team?
I mean, yeah, I was at an event this week and somebody called it a basketball team that was running for governor this year, and that's not that far from incorrect. You've got a lot of dynamics going on. Obviously, I just talked about earlier, being a legislator and going up against the governor. You don't want to go against the sitting governor, especially if he's running for re-election, so that causes some dynamics. Then you've got the sitting attorney general potentially running as well. You've got the sitting member of Congress running, so all people who have statewide incumbency. Then you have a Speaker of the House who has been very successful this year, and a businessman candidate from Aberdeen who largely attributed to that success. So there's dynamics going on there as well, of legislators who are now supporting the Hansen-Lems campaign because they have to live under the rule of the Speaker as well and the leadership. Yet there's dynamics going on that this businessman funded many of those legislative campaigns. And so how do you kind of bite the hand that feeds you and support someone that's different? And so I will not be taking a side right now, but and I'm sure that many people are kind of waiting to see how this pans out because it could get very messy very quickly. And I guess South Dakota is lucky to have so many people wanting to be governor that are, in my opinion, good Republicans, but it'll definitely be a race to watch, and also how that race is going to affect all the other races that are going to be on the ballot in 2026.
Can you just walk us through this? What are you looking for when you're looking at all of these candidates? What are your big sticking points with securing the Amber Hulse endorsement?
Oh gosh, Blake, you're really putting me on the spot here. Well, what I think is interesting, I talked earlier about the two different factions of the Republican Party right now, and I would like to see a candidate who understands that we cannot continue operating at the rate that we are with this factionism, because then the other side that we don't often hear of in South Dakota may take back the reins. And for a long time, people forget South Dakota is the state of Daschle, and we had, a congressional delegation that was all Democrat at one point. And so the Republican Party is really going to have to, figure out what our message is and if we can come back together again. And so I hope that whatever candidate that we get figures out how to navigate those dynamics, because there's two very different messages being shared within the Republican Party right now.
Hey, I'm just really curious, just because going back to that, it's 5 people. It's like you mentioned, it's the whole basketball team. At least out of that, I mean, what are your thoughts on just having like maybe somebody from like DC coming back to South Dakota? I mean, having so many people. You mentioned a little bit being, the interest in being governor. Do you think that it might be better to just kind of only have a little bit rather than have this plethora where maybe votes can be taken away from so many different candidates? Or is this healthy? It's a sign of a healthy election?
I mean, in some ways, in a Republican primary, it would almost be better if all 5 of the candidates considering all ran, because then it would probably be the most fair, given the candidates' political dichotomy. It would be an even 2020 split, and then it would just really be the best man wins in a way. I don't know if all the candidates would agree with me saying that, because it would probably be a really, really messy and in some ways politically nasty primary, which we don't really need to have all of that infighting happen. So I think that they're trying to all sit down and kind of hash it out and be men about it. But like I said, it will impact all of the other races on the ballot. We've got a U.S. Senate seat that's up. We've got a congressional seat that's up. If the Attorney General runs for governor, we have to find a new Attorney General. We've got Secretary of State on the ballot. I mean, all of these races are going to be going on, and if everyone's focused on the gubernatorial race, and that we have 5 candidates running in it, it's going to divide up some of even like the political capital. People don't think about the consultants and the staffing and all the things that go on behind a campaign. I don't know if we have 5 teams in South Dakota, and so it'll be really, really interesting to see how all of that plays out. But we're still a year out, so I feel like it's kind of also a little soon to be speculating some of this.
Gotcha. You know what's funny? Just a little side comment here. I just wonder who, if we are talking about the whole basketball analogy again, I just want to know who's the center, who's the point guard,
right?
And all that. Who's playing who?
Yeah.
You should get one of your comics on that.
Yes, right.
Right now, I just want to touch on this a little bit. South Dakota is really having a moment in the national spotlight. Even when you talk about this congressional seat and the Senate seat, South Dakota has a lot of national influence right now with Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Secretary Kristi Noem, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, who was formerly our governor. As a state lawmaker, are you seeing that influence play out with the way that certain things are happening for the state on the federal level?
I mean, absolutely. I actually, right before I walked in here, just got a call from the White House, and so it's been interesting. And I think that's, not only the folks that you mentioned, but even myself. Like, I was working on the presidential campaign, and so I know a lot of the people in D.C. now. And I don't think a lot of folks realize how important, when you have folks from South Dakota that actually have federal influence, that is. Especially South Dakota has a lot of federal influence. We have half of our state budget right now is federal dollars, and especially in my district, we've got so much national forest land. We've got the VA, we've got national parkland, national parks, and so to have people that you can call in Washington D.C. and fix problems that before you tried to call and they said, oh, this is some random person from North Dakota, they would forget even what state you were actually from. Now we actually have a voice in D.C., which is really good for our state, especially when you're trying to navigate the bureaucracy and get things done for the people on the ground here in Middle America.
Can we end things on a fun note?
Yeah.
Fun note. I saw this on your Instagram. You were recently at Mar-a-Lago. You were there for Easter, I believe.
I was.
What can you share with us about your trip to Florida? We all hate you for escaping the weather and going down there. But nonetheless, yeah, what can you share from that trip?
Yeah, I mean, so during the midst of the presidential campaign, I spent some time down in West Palm at the campaign headquarters. So my main boss was actually the general counsel for the Trump campaign, and I was his associate as outside counsel, and we still represent the president in his personal capacity in cases. And so it's really interesting to be a girl, I always say, from West River to the West Wing. It's a little insane to know people that are at that high of level, but because of that, I had been down in West Palm, and I had only gotten to go to Mar-a-Lago once for a work meeting, actually, and never gotten to go for fun. And so now I have lots of friends and people in those circles, and was able to attend for Easter. I actually went the night before for a fundraiser, and then the morning after was Easter. And so our friends said, well, why don't you join us for Easter brunch? And I was never going to say no to that. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Most important question about the inside of Mar-a-Lago. Yes. Do they have a good waffle guy? I feel like every time I'm at a resort setting, I judge it by the omelet or waffle guy.
I was like, you have to ask, come on.
I mean, I don't know if I didn't have a waffle. There was many other things that I ate for breakfast that morning. There were beautiful pastries. I don't know if you knew this, but Laura Trump actually was a pastry chef before she met Eric, and so I don't know if that's her influence at all, but there was definitely a lot of sweets going on. There's a lot of seafood, like smoked salmon and things like that we don't really get in South Dakota that I indulged in. But I think the most amazing thing is that everything was gold. I mean, you see on TV from, President Trump's former life where he had the golden toilet and all of that, like his ballrooms, and he's talking about building a similar ballroom next to the White House right now, was just adorned. And so there's a picture of me actually where I'm just in awe staring up at the ceiling because there's beautiful chandeliers, and it feels unreal. It feels like a movie set. And I think that's what, the president wants his life to kind of feel like a movie. He's used to reality
Just
TV.
like the KOTA lobby, right?
Yeah.
That you walk through?
Exactly. We're just not used to that in South Dakota.
All right, well, thank you for joining us here once again on KOTA's Political Pulse. It's been a pleasure to have you again this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
Yep. And as for you watching right now, be sure to tune in again next Monday for another episode. But for now, we'll see you, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.